Well, I've been looking forward to ESG all week, and I'll tell you why. Most of you probably associate me with other letters, right? A and I, M and L. But in reality, governance and the G is one of the most important letters in my job and in the work that FICO does. Governance means that we can build and deploy these machine learning models and AI in a responsible way. And we can meet the promise that we have for our clients and for their customers. So I'm super excited about this session, and it's a critical part of our strategy and also a critical part of where our industry has to move. I'm joined today with Courtney Abercrombie, a good friend, CEO of AI Truth. We have talked about these topics on a number of occasions, and so it's a great pleasure to bring her perspective into this conversation also. And to kick it off, Courtney, I think Nikhil said in the beginning that this is a board-level conversations that we're having, and this ESG topic is of critical importance. So can you tell me from your perspective, why is governance, particularly in AI, why is AI governance a board-level conversation?
Boards care about the strategy of the company, the direction it's taking, the risk it's taking on, and they try to do everything they can to build these boring, long documents called corporate policies to help govern everything and make sure that it stays on the right track. And so if you're building AI capabilities or any kind of machine learning capabilities on anything that is less than spectacular or less than quality, it is absolutely, Scott used the term snake oil. There's a lot of AI snake oil out there, and boards absolutely, when you're talking about AI and ML, it's usually a strategic advantage for the company, and you don't want that to be built on snake oil, right?
Absolutely, no snake oil here, but it is a big challenge, right? When we use the term AI, what is actually behind the AI? How do we have proof of work? And more importantly, how can we make sure that we monitor that AI and we understand how it's going to behave in production before it harms people? And so it's really, really critically important. Speaking of things that are critically important, Courtney, what would be your view on the most critical component of AI governance? It's a complex topic, and we'll talk more about it, but what's the number one thing that you think is most important from an AI governance perspective?
Trust. We, as a society right now, I don't know how about many of you, but can you just right off the top of your head think of any entity right now in your life that you actually trust? Do you trust? So in the book that you guys are going to get later, by the way, thank you, I talk about all these elements of how we don't trust even each other right now. We don't trust politics. We don't trust media. We don't trust even our neighbors at this point. How are you going to build tech that someone can trust in a trustless environment like this? You're going to have to start paying attention to every aspect that goes into your products, and not just pay attention, but you're going to have to find a way to show people. People feel imbued with trust when they can see it for themselves. Show me. Show me everything that you've done and why I should trust this and how it can be explained to me. And that is one of the things that actually brought me to Scott, which brings us to our next question, right? I was about to overwhelm our next question.
Yeah, well,
I'm nervous and I'm a talker.
It's okay, we're here to talk. So, in terms of trust though, it's really important. And it's something that is really core to my heart, right? When we survey our customers, right, trust is one of the number one, topics that they put at the very top of the list of what they respect and they like about FICO. So it is core, and I'm glad that you see that coming through. Trust is, not granted, it's earned, and it's continually earned. And so I think it's something that we take very, very seriously.
And I'll just add a point to that. So before I actually even trusted Scott, I went and checked my FICO score online and looked to see, did I agree with this? Because I am also a show me and a very big skeptic. And before I reached to Scott as an example of who I think is doing something really great in terms of explainability and transparency, and I loved the FICO approach. Wouldn't we love to know when you get kicked off of Twitter, if we had a little score with transparency that we could look up, like we look up our FICO score? Wouldn't that be great? Yeah, okay. I mean, you guys don't have to applaud or anything, but I think that would be a fantastic idea.
Yeah. Well, so transparency, you're getting into, probably what we should explore next, because it's, how do you establish trust? And you just brought up a great one, transparency, right? An ability for a consumer to have trust is for them to understand the decision and also to have an understanding of how to improve, let's say, an outcome or why they have that outcome. So it's a really important part of, our strategy. But can you talk more about, what are some of the core sort of tenets of what success looks like when people are correctly implementing AI governance?
And I've got a little story first to illustrate this, because I'm from Texas. We tell stories. That's what we do. And so a friend of mine, she has a car. Well, her husband actually bought a car that does the parking for itself. Do you guys have, maybe some of you have this car? Her husband trusts it inherently and just uses it all the time. And she says, nah, I'm not going to use that. I don't trust it. And I'm like, why? What's going on here? Why don't you trust it? And of course, responsible AI, so I'm trying to figure out what it is about this exactly that she doesn't trust. And she says, well, what if it's nighttime and there's a black car in the back? I mean, do I know if it's been trained on that? I mean, is the data there to support that it actually won't hit that car? And then we thought about all these scenarios like mothers do, right? What if there's a lady getting her baby out of the car and there's a toddler there? As moms, we all know toddlers are sporadic little individuals that will, erratic, they'll just, run out right there in front of a car. What if something like that happens, And so all these scenarios, and isn't that interesting, even just in that right there, talking about the difference between her husband and her. Women and men think so differently. Does anybody remember the women are from Venus, men are from Mars, or something like that? I mean, we all think so differently about things, don't we? And in order to bring all those elements in, I'm not even giving you a chance to say anything. I'm so sorry.
Get in there.
But I mean, in order to... He knows, we've had these conversations before. But in order to build it all in, we need to have consensual, contextual data, things that don't violate our personal standards of use. So things like when data comes from web scraping, I kind of go, because that's not really the purpose that it was initially intended for necessarily. When I think about when I trust something, I want to know about it. I want to see it. I want to have transparency, accessibility. So it's not enough for you to just tell me on the phone on 1-800 number through a chat bot, nonetheless. You got to actually, I love that FICO has it where you could actually go online, see it, and understand what went into it, the explainability factor, and the agency imbuing. So if I don't like something that's on there and I disagree vehemently and I want to change that, I actually have a recourse. I can appeal, right? And I think that's part of this. And then the other part of this is that I know that you guys are using fair and quality data that won't cause, and that's from talking to you, that we know that that's happening. But when I see a good governance plan, what it looks like to me and what I go in looking for in companies that I find exemplary on this front is a full culture of trustworthiness. From the ground up and from the top down. Does the CEO value trustworthiness? And would they go through that extra effort? Because it is easy to cut corners when you're innovating. It's easy to just go fast. What's the motto? Move fast and break things. But guess what? You're breaking us. We're the numbers behind that. I love Sally's.
Yeah.
Exactly. I love Sally's. I want to give you a chance to say something.
Yeah, well, no. So I think, you brought up a couple of great points, right? And I'll talk about a couple, right? You talk about the driverless cars, right? It is actually a really interesting topic, right? Around how those algorithms are trained for those cars. As we know, one of those cars killed a pedestrian, right? And if you go look at the scenario of how that occurred, it occurred because of the type of training data that was used. It was also occurred because people would notice that when they took these cars out on the road and a piece of paper would fly across the road, the car would brake, right? And so as they would drive down the road, the car would brake, and people would get sick in this car. And so it wasn't a very good user experience. So they dialed down the sensitivity, right, so that you could have a better experience, right? And this is a really important topic. It's around the sort of ethics of the use of these AI models, right? So by making it not a jittery ride, one which is braking all the time at things moving across the street, someone got killed. And I think that really speaks to how complex this is, right? We can build a model that's very predictive. How that model gets used, right? And whether it meets with our kind of expectations from a governance perspective and from a social perspective, and is really, really important. The other point that you brought up, which I'll mention, and I think it's really important, and I think it's a bit of a crisis for many of organizations out there, is do they have sufficient support from the very top of the organization? I mean, at FICO, I am blessed with that support, and we all operate under very firm model development governance standards, right? And for me, what that means is that we have a robust set of robust AI practices, and we have ethical AI practices, and we focus on explainability and transparency as core tenets also. And finally, auditable AI, right? The ability to make sure that we can audit what was happening, we record every step of the model development process, and moreover, all those assets are there for when the model starts to go a little bit off the rail, right? So we understand how we are going to remediate that model, or understand when we pull it all together, because it feeds directly into a monitoring process. And for most of the industry today, after they've built this AI, they may not have the governance details they need to demonstrate that it was built properly. And moreover, a larger proportion of customers and people that are building AI don't even have the monitoring in place to sufficiently know when to stop using that model. So it's a really critical and important piece of our strategy and how to be responsible and how to govern these models in the wild.
And part of that governance, so when I was looking at what FICO was doing and specifically what Scott's doing, part of what was really interesting is I look at these exemplary practices in terms of an operating model, spoken like a consultant, right? I look at them and I say, okay, what are the people, the process, the people and their responsibilities, the processes that they go through and how they work together as a team on these data science initiatives that are AI and ML based. And then I look at also at the technologies that they're using. And one of the things that Scott had was he was requiring as part of a hiring, and if you want to chime in, but that data scientists actually document things. Now, I don't know how many of you know data science culture, but things tend to be fast and loose, and there's data coming in from all these different sources, and they're getting munched together, just like, like Frankenstein, and things are getting put together so quick, and then let's test that model again and run it through, and then bring it back, and it's very iterative. And so what you see is there's like this circular team is how I think of it, and there's these data engineers and these junior data scientists and these ones that build the algorithm, and there's the lead data scientist, and he's going back and forth with the main, maybe it's a chief marketing officer or a chief digital officer, and they're trying to build a personalization something or other. And they're all going like this, and nothing's getting documented. And you can't provide transparency and explainability when you don't even have a method for that.
Yeah, and there are 3 other letters that are sometimes used with data scientists, and that's EGO, ego, right? And so,
Exactly.
That is one of the challenges, right? Is the data scientist believes they understand how to solve the problem, right? And they ultimately very often don't. And so you're right. I mean, when one of our initial conversations, and this is why it's important to have a model development governance process that is corporate-wide. It's why you need to have standards, right? Is that we hire people that are not going to come in with egos. We're going to hire people that appreciate that we can harm people with these technologies. And we have to demonstrate to ourselves and to our board and to everyone around us, including our customers and regulators, that we're not going to do so. And that these are protections for those same data scientists to thrive in their careers as data scientists and to serve the better good, but to do it in a way which is responsible and safe.
And the other aspect that just blew me away was that I haven't seen anywhere else was this ability to use tools to help move that process along so that when the data scientists are putting in what kind of data, when they used it and all of that good stuff, there's a sign-off process before they can actually move to the next step of that iterative process. And because we're all using data that's just kind of flowing through instead of like being stagnant usually, or some of our data may be stagnant, but a lot of it's just kind of flowing through. And Scott actually was able to do this blockchain technology to document even the sources that were used at the time and what they looked like at that time, because if you look at your data sources, those can drift too, and things can change. I once did a project with an IoT, Internet of Things type of group, and only a metric changed from a metric, like a metric system metric, based on 10 versus 12, here in the States. And it messed up everything in the data. But, that happens. It's just something that's usual. And so when Scott was showing me this great documentation system, and it even had this blockchain capability to kind of take that snapshot in time of the data for even more accountability, I was like, this has to be spread. You got to tell more people about that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, so for us, accountability is tremendously important. And so, part of us using the blockchain is that it's immutable. People sign off, there are names associated, there's times associated, people make mistakes, those are persisted to the blockchain also. What we're trying to do is have a fair and complete representation, which is immutable, which basically means that it cannot be changed. And people start to take their jobs very seriously, and they start to ensure that they comply with these standards when they sign their name against it. And so I'm really proud of the fact that our team uses that, and then, in doing so, the data scientists understand how important this is, that we demonstrate that we followed all those steps.
It's very clear to me just sitting here and hearing all of the different discussions, especially just through this session, that you guys take this very seriously. And I am so happy because FICO gets used underneath other models. Like your models actually get used and your scores actually get used, because I flew all over the world looking at different AI solutions. I logged probably about 1,000 different AI solutions. And I saw FICO being used as a proxy for responsibility because nobody knows how to measure responsible behavior. That's how much weight you guys carry on you as FICO.
But our mission, our joint mission, right? Our joint mission is to bring that to the knowledge in for more people to use, right? I mean, when we look at the industry where AI is going, and we look at the EU regulation, which is starting to prohibit the use of machine learning technologies, we all as an industry have to learn how to do this better. We're running out of time, but what would be one or two steps, and then we'll do a call to action that people can take away? I mean, the conversation has to continue. What would be those one or two steps?
Well, I'm going to cheat and actually use mine and put it into the call of action. Let's see if I can do it.
Okay.
I'd say first, educate yourself about the different issues that exist. And in the book that you will be receiving, which is my call to action, you will actually see in the back of the book, flip there and look at the 12 Tenets of Trust, which is what Scott and I have talked about. And I talk about those in depth because I think, just like how Bill's children were going to insist on being able to, have certain climate, orders, they want to see it. I think in the future, the next generation is definitely looking at, hey, I want to see everything about everything. And if you're going to be making scores about me, I want to see it. So I would say get educated about the issues. And then if you are data leaders, definitely start talking to your peers if you don't already have AI ethics principles declared, because trust is everything.
Absolutely. And, my call to action would be, let's keep the conversation going. Mine and Courtney's details are on the screen, right? If you don't know me or you haven't talked to me about these concepts and you're interested, please reach out, right? Or have your client partners help with that. I'm very pleased and always happy to have those conversations. As Courtney mentioned, right, this is going to take best practices. It's going to take sharing of how we are going to implement a responsible AI framework that organizations can follow and demonstrate that they are using, so that we can ensure that we are doing and using AI responsibly. So that'd be the call to action. the other thing, as Courtney mentioned, is that we have the book. Please educate yourself about some of these dangers, right? I think everyone in this room is very, very aware of the dangers of AI. But take this book, there's some that'll be there in the corner, and share it with your colleagues and raise awareness. There is a need to govern it, but part of the need to govern it is to understand that there is a problem that needs to be managed there. With that, thank you, Courtney. I really appreciate you taking the time with me here.
Thank you.
And I'd like to call Nikhil up to the stage.